Hello, everyone. My name is Teresa McCloy, and you're listening to the Real Life Process podcast, episode number 179. Every week here on the podcast, I invite you to listen in and now also watch on our YouTube channel as I share tips, stories, and practical action steps that lead you to live a life from rest, not rush, and do what matters. We'll share ideas about our signature content, the real life process, and help you thrive in your work and your life. Our content is actually set up like a framework that will help you develop a unique modern day rule of life and self-discovery around setting up 90-day actionable projects, time management, and spiritual practices. Together, we'll discover how to craft a life that is full of extraordinary moments. So whether you're listening in to grow yourself or to grow your business as an entrepreneur, we're just glad you're listening in and becoming part of the Real Life Process community. We want to invite you in. Listen in this week as we continue on our journey of our signature content. We're walking through all the components of the real life process. With the new book coming out this fall, we actually are going back through all the content of the process right here on the podcast so you can hear how you take these four components and really do begin to live from rest, not rush. So the last few episodes, we've actually introduced the concepts of the real life process, the components that they are. And then last week, we dove into 3 of our signature tools on episode number 178. So you may want to go back. These are sequential, so you may want to go back and listen in as we move along. But on today's episode, we're really going to dive into continuing to create in component number 1, what we call the real life being, to continue to create this foundation, this internal knowing of self. So let's dive in. If you like to watch and follow along, I actually have a slide deck that I share over on the YouTube channel, but I promise you can get everything you know and need to know about our content just by listening in. But let's dive in. Let's review what the real life process components are. Once again, in case you're a brand new listener and you're just plugging in. Component number 1 is what we call the real life being, defining what matters in your life and creating your personal real life view document. We're actually diving into that more on this particular episode. Then in next week's episode, we'll dive into real life action. We're going to take what we've learned from that internal being and put it out into action in the world. And we'll create 90-day projects to move you forward in living out what you've created in this document. Then we'll move into the practical third component of real life time. How do you create that framework of your calendar and organize it and order it so that each day is an extraordinary day and you go exactly where you want to go in that day? And then the fourth component is what we call real life living, learning to order your entire life with rhythms and routines of rest, renew, and review. So as we go into each episode going forward, we'll be going into components number 2, 3, and 4. But today we're going to finish up component number 1 of the real life process. So here we go. We're creating this rule of life, a modern day rule of life, that foundational piece that is crafted through discernment and partnership with God as you consider the ways He's designed you and what are the values He's put on your heart. Once discovered and written, and that's where we're getting to, is this idea of writing it down. I'm always amazed at the number of people who actually don't write down what they want to get from life, what they've discerned, what their vision is, what their goals are, what's going to carry them forward. We call that a real life view document. That's the way we organize it together. So once we discover it and we write it down, it serves as a tool and a framework. Now we can make decisions for your life and determine how to best order and align our days. That's what we call a modern day rule of life. Now, we want to put some tools in your toolbox. And on last week's episode, we talked about 3 of our signature tools: the needs and values assessment, knowing what your basic needs are, what are the needs that are designed in your personality, different than mine, and what are your basic values. And we have a download for those. We also had a download in the show notes for the Enneagram personality tool, that typing guide tool that you can begin to discover the Enneagram with. Now, that may not be the tool that you love to use. You might have other personality tools. That's absolutely fine. We're going to talk about that today, where you're going to capture all of that. And then we talked about the tool of the mind map and how we love the real life mind map and drawing out things and capturing that up kind of in a big view and then putting it into actionable steps. Now, you have all these signature tools. What are you going to do with them? Where are you going to capture them? And that's what we want to talk about today, is what we call a real life view document. Now, what this document is actually capturing all these things in a written form. So we like to divide this into 4 sections. This is the being part of who you are. This is who you want to be and how you want your life to shine out into the world. So that first section is capturing those 5 needs and values. Now, if you work with one of our coaches or one of our facilitators, we actually have a longer form of that needs and values assessment. But you can download the free version either on our website right now. It's still there and available on our website, the intro to the needs and values. You can go to the RealLifeProcess.com and download that. Or you can also get it from the show notes from episode number 178. And then in section number 2 of this document that we're creating, we want to write down, what are your talents, your gifts, and your abilities? Now, there's lots of ways that many of you have discovered those talents, gifts, and abilities. For us at the Real Life Process, we love using the tool of the Enneagram as a way to kind of see what your 3 centers of intelligence are. What do you think? What do you feel? How do you take action on those things? So that's one of the things that we write in section number 2, is just what we've learned from that assessment. You might have done some of the other personality assessments. You might have taken a spiritual gifts assessment. You might have just had people speak into your life that said, you know, you are so gifted at this. You are a great speaker. You're a great teacher. I love the way you write. You may know for yourself, just from what you've discerned and learned about yourself. Let's capture those and let's write these down. And the reason that we do this is because there are times when you'll go back and read through this document, and we're going to teach you how to do that on a regular basis. And you'll say, oh my gosh, I so needed to be reminded this week that I have these gifts, talents, and abilities. And this is the way I'm uniquely designed by God, and this is the way I'm made. And there are other weeks where you will get to celebrate that. Thank you so much that I get to use these gifts, talents, and abilities. So no matter what kind of week you've had, as you do a weekly review, being reminded of exactly who you are so that you can keep your blinders on, you can stay on track, is so helpful and important. Then in section number 3, we'll actually teach you how to create a real life view statement, a real life statement. And when we get to this, we won't go into this right now on this particular podcast episode, but we will come back around to it. This is an important part of the work that we do once we've done all these other being pieces. But today we're going to talk about this 4th section that we call your areas of focus. And we're going to determine, what are the big rocks? What are the areas of focus in your life? And so let's walk through that on today's episode. Now, you may want to capture all this information. It's so important to write it down. You may want to do it in a Word doc. You may want to do it in a Google Doc, but getting these 4 sections on one piece of paper on one side is so important. Now, we actually have a download that you can look at, and I'll kind of show you how we have it laid out. You can see kind of small here if you're watching on the YouTube video, but just picture this in your mind. At the top is the needs and values, then the talents, gifts, and abilities, and then we have the real life statement, and then we have these areas of focus that we're going to work on today. So you can download our template in your show notes if you would like to for the Real Life View document. It's a 2-page document. Next week on episode 180, we'll be talking about what you're going to put on the second page of that document. But I encourage you to follow along and listen in today as we go through these areas of focus. So what I want to share with you a quote that I wrote in the book about the areas of focus. There's just such ownership that takes place. A part that I wrote about the Real Life View document. There is just such ownership that takes place when a document is created and written down. It's not the structure of the document that's magic, but the process of working through each section and pre-deciding what matters for your life. You'll revisit this document often as you live out your new modern day rule of life in your real life process. So there isn't anything magic in the formula or how it's written. It's the idea of capturing it somewhere. Now, some people love to do this in a vision board, and maybe you would like more of a picture form of your real life view document with statements underneath it. And we'll talk about what those statements are. But this document is so helpful to take the time to discern and to process through that if I'm going to write this down, this really matters to me. So let's dive in to actually what this looks like and how we get there. So I often talk about it being like putting the pickles in the jar. And if you've listened to me, you've heard this story before, but if not, let me share it with you. When I think about this jar of pickles, I live on a farm in central Illinois, and my mother-in-law taught me to can some delicious sweet pickles over 40 years ago now. You can actually see them if you're watching on YouTube. You can see the jar of pickles there with the white lid on them on my shelf. And even if you can't see it and you're just listening in, just picture a jar of delicious sweet pickles. Now, if I put the juice and the spices in the jar first, these are all the unimportant things. Then I go to put the pickles in, which are the important things, the things that really matter. All of a sudden, I have a mess all over my counter because the juice was in the jar first. So what we want to do in our areas of focus is identify the pickles, identify the big things that we want to put into our life first. I even have some of our clients and facilitators that refer to the pickles often and say, I've got the right pickles in the jar. And one of the ways that we do this is actually through the Real Life View document, is actually through a mind map. If you remember last week's episode, we talked about writing a circle in the center and putting all the little circles around it. And so if you were doing this exercise to define the pickles that matter, the areas of focus in your life, just write the word life in the center of the paper and then start to write the things that matter to you. You might write down things like, I need to take care of myself. So self-care is important to me, my own health. My spiritual life is important to me. My financial life is important. My professional life. Now, those are some of the big ones that a lot of people write down automatically. But then we get into things that are unique to you. This is why this is called your real life view. Your document from up on the balcony of your life, how you view your life in the real life process. So in your real life, you may have things like, for me, I have something called travel and recreation, because it's super important to me in this season of life to travel, to have fun, to do fun things with my husband and my family. Or you might have something like deep friendships or extended family, or maybe your kids and your spouse each get a bucket, each get to be a separate pickle, depending on your season of life. You get to decide what these are and just use a mind map and start to brain dump some of these things out. What you want to end up with is 5 to 7 areas of focus in your life. So play around with it a little bit, mix them together, see if you can come up to somewhere in that number. If you come up with more than that, it might not, but it could feel overwhelming, like I have too many things. Remember, these are areas of focus. And next week on our episode, we'll talk about how we're not going to focus on all of them at the same time, but they all matter. And so we want to identify that they all matter. Where we get into trouble often with overwhelm is when we try to put everything into our calendar at the same time. And we think that we're doing all these things at the same time. Over time, as we identify these 5 to 7 areas, then next week, we're going to decide what in the next 90 days am I going to focus on. Not all of them. Some of them can be in maintenance mode, but some of them matter, and we're moving them forward. I have a client that I'm working with right now that's opening a new business. And because she's opening a new business and launching it and getting the business designed, it's a brick and mortar space, she is very much in the next 90 days focusing on her professional area of focus and getting that new business launched. And what the Real Life View helps you do, and the whole components of the Real Life process, is remember that you don't stay there forever. You come back and you check in with the other areas every 90 days and say, okay, is there any of these areas that I need to put back into focus, that I need to bring back to front and center? And we talked about that as we've been coaching together, that we don't want to let go of her family area of focus or her spiritual life or her self-care. But right now, the priority is getting this business launched. So we know that that's going to take up more time in the next 90 days. Then we want to bring it back into perspective. So let's get these 5 to 7 areas identified. Then once we've identified them, the next thing we want to do is write a statement for each one of them. It's not only important to say, this is what I've identified, but this is what I want it to look like in the next year to 18 months. This is how I want it to grow. This is how I want to move forward. This is why growth, personal development, expansion of yourself, what's the next thing, is so important, is writing down the statement of what you would want it to look like in the next year to year and a half. Once you've identified these areas and have written them down in your Real Life View document, I encourage you to write an area of focus statement. We often call this an I am statement. You want to write your I am statement as if you're already living in that space. This is so important. Identify it, write it as something that's already happening. So when you read through this document, you feel like you're already living it out. So let me give you some examples of some different I am statements. Here's one. I am prioritizing my health and exercising 4 to 5 days a week. Now, the person who wrote this statement wasn't exercising 4 to 5 days a week right now, but they're writing the statement as if they will be doing that in the future. And then we'll break that down in component number 2 when we talk about real life action as to how we're going to put action steps with that so that that statement becomes a reality. Many people would say this is a goal statement. And if you're looking for goals in the real life process components, this would be where you would find them. Here's another one. I sow into building deep relationships and connections by being a vulnerable and available friend. So this person wrote this I am statement around their friendships. And you can see that they're saying, I do something, I sow into. So they're working on and breaking down actionable steps that will help them sow into those relationships. And that could look different as we get into the second component. Here's another one. I regularly journal, walk, and engage in meaningful conversations with my closest friends. This is energizing and grounding for me. So you can see they're identifying what they will do. I am doing this regularly. Now, again, they may not be doing it yet, but this is what's possible and what they want to grow into. And here's actually my real life I am statement on my Real Life View document around my professional area of focus. It says, I am an influencer, an entrepreneur growing a multiple six-figure business as a coach, podcaster, speaker, and author. I am an influencing, serving, and equipping people through my company to live a sustainable modern-day rural life. I inspire them to live extraordinary lives through the coaching and training I provide, the content I create, retreats I host, and speaking I do. So you see, there's a lot of things there. I'm not at all of those places yet in my professional life and business, but that's where I want to be in the next year to 2 years. So I've written it down so I can identify with it. So in this real life being component, we are capturing all 4 of these sections. We're capturing the needs and values. We're capturing the talents, gifts, and abilities in section number 2. We'll come back and capture section number 3 with our real life statement. And then this week, your homework, your action steps is to define your 5 to 7 areas of focus and write an I am statement. Years ago, before I started working with the Real Life Process, before I had created it and designed it, I often use the idea of the visual of the upside down triangle. I was so defined by my work, and my life was in the center of that triangle, and it came down to my real self at the very end of that little point at the bottom. And I just wasn't stable because I was constantly striving to identify with the work I was doing at the current time. Instead of when you flip that triangle upside down and you work on knowing yourself well through this real life being piece. Who am I? What are my needs and values? What are the areas that matter to me? How do I want to write an I am statement, a goal statement about each of those areas so I can live into that in the next year or 2? When I was able to do that and make the base of the triangle wide and get a good foundation, then I could live it out in my real life in the middle of that triangle. And at the very top now, when it's setting firm on foundation, I could do my best real work, whatever I was called to do. So if you want to check that out visually, go over to our YouTube channel, make sure you subscribe while you're there, and you can see those triangles that I'm showing on the YouTube video. So what I want to encourage you to do this week is finish up that real life view, the being side of your real life view document. Capture that somewhere, either in a Word doc, a Google doc, or download from our show notes the free template that we have, and begin to walk through the building of this firm foundation that you have, that you can build on to begin to frame out component number 1 of the real life process. So we just want to thank you so much for listening in to this episode of the Real Life Process podcast. We are so enjoying sharing with you each of the components and each of the steps. If you want to grow and increase your income and impact that you're doing by receiving all of this done for you content, then go on over to our website at thereallifeprocess.com and check out how to become one of our certified facilitators. Or if you're looking to just grow personally, you can also check out how to work with one of our coaches here at the Real Life Process. And they will walk you through, in a coach approach, all of these components of the Real Life Process. And you can download some of our free downloads over on our website as well at thereallifeprocess.com. We spell real life with one L. So check that out. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast either on your favorite podcast app or now on our YouTube channel as well. We would love to have you follow along there as well. And we will be back next week to dive into the next component, real life action, here on the podcast and talk you through how to take these real life view statements, these statements that you made around your areas of focus, and put them into action. How can I grow in all of these different areas of my life? Believe me, it is possible when we follow the process. So until next week, remember that every ordinary day has an extraordinary moment. You just have to look for them. And we'll be back next week with more from the Real Life Process podcast. Have a great week, everyone.